The conference room on the Galactic Station was filled with beings from across the known universe. Some had forearms, others had scales that changed color with their mood, and a few floated in special gravity fields. They all had one thing in common: they looked down on humans. Ambassador Choi Yunbi sat at the small table marked Earth, while around her, representatives from dozens of worlds discussed trade routes and territorial disputes. Her table was pushed to the back corner, almost hidden behind a decorative plant. This was where they always put the human representative. "The mining rights to Sector 7 will go to the highest bidder," announced Council Leader Vextar, a tall being with purple skin and 3 eyes. "The Vakari Empire offers 12,000 credits per cycle." Choi Unbi raised her hand. "Earth would like to place a bid as well." A sound like laughter filled the room, though it came from creatures that had no concept of human humor. The Vakari representative, a massive being covered in thick armor plates, stood up from his seat. "The young species wishes to play with the adults," he said, his voice booming through the translation devices everyone wore. "How charming. Tell us, little human, what can your primitive world offer?" "We can offer 15,000 credits per cycle," Choi Yunbi replied calmly. She had expected this reaction. It happened every time Earth tried to participate in galactic commerce. "Credits you do not have," sneered the Vakari. "Your species has been part of our community for 30 years, yet you still struggle to mine your own asteroids. Perhaps you should focus on growing food for the real civilizations." More sounds of amusement echoed through the chamber. Choi Yunbi felt her face grow warm, but she kept her expression neutral. She had been Earth's ambassador for 5 years, and had learned to control her reactions to such insults. Council Leader Vextar waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "The mining rights go to the Vakari Empire. Now let us move to the next matter." The meeting continued for 3 more hours. Every time Choi Yunbi tried to speak, she was either ignored or mocked. Earth's requests for technology sharing were laughed at. Their offers to provide agricultural products were dismissed as barely adequate for animal feed. Their attempts to join exploration missions were rejected because humans are too emotional and unpredictable for serious work. When the session finally ended, Choi Yunbi gathered her papers and prepared to leave. As she walked toward the exit, the Vakari representative stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Tell me, little ambassador," he said, looking down at her with eyes like black stones. "Does your species still fight wars among yourselves?" "Not for over 50 years, she replied. "We learned to work together." "How peaceful," the Vakari said, his voice dripping with contempt. "My people conquered 17 worlds before we even discovered fire. We built our empire through strength, not through growing vegetables and signing treaties. Perhaps that is why we rule star systems while you beg for scraps." Choi Unbi looked up at the towering alien. "Perhaps," she said quietly. "But maybe there are different kinds of strength." The Vakari laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Your weakness amuses me, human. I hope for your sake that you never discover what real strength looks like." He walked away, leaving Choi Yunbi standing alone in the empty chamber. She looked around at the magnificent hall, with its crystal pillars and holographic displays showing the locations of thousands of worlds. Somewhere out there was Earth, a small blue planet that most of the galaxy saw as insignificant. Meanwhile, on the human colony world of Kepler 442b, farmer Kim Dae-ho was checking his crop sensors when the sky began to burn. The attack came without warning. One moment the colonists were going about their daily lives, tending to their farms, teaching their children, building homes for the 50,000 people who had chosen to make this distant world their new home. The next moment, Vakari warships filled the sky like dark clouds. Kim Dae-ho ran toward his house where his wife Park So-jin and their 2 young children were probably having lunch. The ground shook beneath his feet as energy beams struck the town center. Buildings that had taken years to construct were turned to ash in seconds. "So-jin," he shouted as he reached his home. The front wall had been blown away, leaving the interior exposed like a broken toy. He found his family huddled in what remained of the kitchen, his wife protecting their children with her own body. "The communication center," Sojin said urgently. "We need to warn Earth." But even as they spoke, more explosions lit up the horizon. The communication center, the power plant, the spaceport, all of the colony's vital infrastructure was being systematically destroyed. Outside, Vakari soldiers were landing in the streets. They moved with the efficiency of a species that had conquered worlds for thousands of years. They did not kill indiscriminately, that would be wasteful. Instead, they herded the human colonists into groups, scanning them with devices that seemed to measure their physical capabilities. Kim Dae-ho watched from his ruined home as families were separated. The young and strong were loaded onto transport ships. The old and weak were simply left behind, forgotten like broken tools. His heart pounded as he realized what was happening. This was not a military conquest. This was a slave raid. "They are taking our people," he whispered to his wife. Sojin held their children closer. "We need to hide. We need to—" The wall behind them exploded inward, and 3 Vakari soldiers entered their home. They were even larger than the representative Choyunbi had met, their armor making them look like walking mountains. One of them pointed a device at Kim Dae-ho and made a sound that his translator rendered as adequate. The soldiers grabbed him and Sojin, ignoring the screams of their children. As they were dragged outside, Kim Dae-ho saw the true scale of the disaster. Smoke rose from dozens of locations across the valley. Transport ships were already lifting off, filled with human captives. The attack had been planned down to the smallest detail. On the command ship hovering above the colony, General Thekmar watched the operation with satisfaction. The humans had built a pleasant little world here, with neat farms and tidy cities. It would make an excellent mining outpost once the current inhabitants were removed. "How many have we captured?" he asked his aide. 47,632, the aide replied, "all within acceptable age and health parameters. They will work well in the deep mines." "And casualties?" "Minimal. We followed the plan precisely. Destroy infrastructure, capture workers, ignore the useless ones. Very efficient." General Thekmar nodded. "Broadcast the operation to the galactic networks. Let the other species see how easily humans are defeated. It will discourage any thoughts of resistance." The aide hesitated. "Sir, should we be concerned about Earth's response?" They might what?" General Thekmar interrupted. "Send angry messages to the Galactic Council? File a complaint with the Trade Commission? The humans are weak, aide. They have no real military, no stomach for war, and no allies who would risk themselves for such a pathetic species." He gestured toward the view screen, which showed human families being loaded onto the transport ships. "Look at them. They do not even fight back. They simply accept their fate like domestic animals. This is why the Vakari Empire rules the galaxy, while humans grow food." The broadcast went out across the galactic communication network within hours. On dozens of worlds, alien beings watched as the human colony was systematically stripped of its people. The images were clear and detailed. Vakari ships arriving, human infrastructure being destroyed, colonists being captured and transported away like cargo. The reaction was exactly what General Thekmar had expected. Some species expressed mild sympathy for the humans, but most saw it as a natural consequence of weakness. A few even praised the Vakari for their efficiency. On Earth, Admiral Park So-jin, mother of the captured colonist, sat in the Global Defense Council chamber watching the same broadcast. Around her, the leaders of humanity's military forces watched in silence as their people were enslaved before their eyes. "How many?" asked General Lee Min-seok, his voice barely above a whisper. 50,000, replied Admiral Park. "Including my daughter and her family." The room fell silent. These were not politicians or diplomats. They were soldiers, people who had spent their careers preparing for the day when humanity might have to fight for its survival. They had always hoped that day would never come. "The Galactic Council?" asked Commander Han Bo-ram. "Ambassador Choi is requesting an emergency session," Admiral Park replied. "But we all know how that will go." They did know. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 30 years, always trying to prove they belonged, always being treated as children playing dress-up among adults. The other species saw them as useful for manual labor and food production, but not worthy of respect or protection. "Orders, Admiral?" asked General Lee. Admiral Park looked around the room at the faces of Earth's military leadership. These were people who had studied every war humanity had ever fought, from ancient battles with spears and shields to the global conflicts that had nearly destroyed their world before they learned to work together. They knew things about warfare that the peaceful galaxy had forgotten. "We wait for the Council's response," she said finally. "We give diplomacy one chance to work, but even as Shah, deep beneath the mountains of Colorado, Dr. Lee Min-seok walked through corridors that officially did not exist. The facility was called Research Station 7 on the public records, listed as a place where scientists studied underground geology. In reality, it was something much more important. The elevator descended for 2 full minutes before finally stopping. When the doors opened, Lee stepped into a chamber carved from solid rock, filled with equipment that no alien inspector had ever seen. The air hummed with energy from machines that pushed the boundaries of physics itself. "Status report," he said to Commander Yoon Jae-sung, who was waiting for him at the central control station. "All systems are operational," Yoon replied. "We have been ready for this day since the project began 12 years ago." Lee nodded and looked around the vast chamber. Project Ragnarok had been humanity's greatest secret, an insurance policy that most people hoped would never be needed. While Earth's diplomats spoke of peace and cooperation, its scientists had been preparing for the possibility that the galaxy might not be as civilized as it pretended to be. "Show me the quantum tunneling warheads," Lee said. Yoon led him to a sealed section where rows of sleek missiles waited in their launch tubes. They looked simple, almost primitive compared to the flashy energy weapons that other species preferred. But appearances could be deceiving. Each warhead can phase shift through normal matter, Yoon explained. Shields, armor, hull plating, they all become meaningless. The quantum field allows the weapon to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously until it reaches its target. Lee picked up one of the smaller warheads, about the size of a football. It felt surprisingly light. "How many do we have?" 15,000 of various sizes, from these small ones that can destroy a single ship to the planet crackers that can split a moon in half. They moved to the next section, where thousands of small dark objects hung from the ceiling like sleeping bats. Engineer Han Bo-ram was working at a control panel, running diagnostic tests on the machines. "The hunter-killer drones," she explained as they approached. "Each one contains a quantum computer with artificial intelligence that makes them completely autonomous. They can think, learn, and adapt faster than any biological mind." Lee examined one of the drones closely. It was about the size of a human hand, made from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "How intelligent are they?" "Individually, each drone is smarter than most organic beings, but they work together in swarms of millions. They share information instantly, coordinate attacks perfectly, and learn from every encounter. Once released, they hunt their targets without mercy and without rest." Han pointed to a holographic display showing thousands of red dots moving in complex patterns. "This is a simulation of just 1,000 drones attacking a standard Vakari fleet. Watch what happens." The display showed a typical battle formation of 20 Vakari ships, their shields raised and weapons ready. Then the red dots appeared. At the edge of the screen, tiny specks that seemed insignificant compared to the massive warships. But as Lee watched, the specks began to move. They flowed like water, splitting into smaller groups approaching from dozens of different angles. When the Vakari ships opened fire, the drones simply flowed around the energy beams like smoke. And when they reach their targets, they do. "Not just destroy," Han explained as the simulation showed Vakari ships being torn apart from the inside. "They infect. Each drone can reproduce itself using the target's own materials. 1 becomes 10. 10 becomes 100. 100 becomes 1,000. Lee watched the simulation run to its conclusion. In less than 10 minutes, the proud Vakari fleet had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris, while the drone count had grown from 1,000 to over 50,000. How do we stop them once they are released, he asked. We do not, Han replied simply. They are designed to continue hunting until they receive a specific shutdown signal from Earth. If that signal is not sent, they will hunt forever. They moved to the final section, where the most ambitious project waited. Captain Kim Dae-ho stood before a massive machine that seemed to bend space around itself. The air near it shimmered like heat waves, and looking directly at it made Lee's eyes water. The gravity well manipulator, Kim explained. We call it the Godhammer. Lee stared at the machine in awe. The theory behind it was simple. If you could manipulate gravity on a large enough scale, you could do almost anything. Crush ships like tin cans, create artificial black holes, even fold space itself. What is its maximum range? He asked. We can target anything within a 10 light-year radius, Kim replied. The effect is instantaneous regardless of distance. We can sit here on Earth and reach out to touch any point in local space. Lee thought about the implications. Most space battles were fought at ranges measured in thousands of kilometers. The ability to attack targets 10 light-years away was beyond anything the galaxy had imagined possible. And the power requirements? Kim smiled grimly. That was the biggest challenge. We solved it by tapping directly into Earth's magnetic field. The planet itself powers our weapons. As they toured the facility, Lee was struck by something he had not fully understood before. Humanity had not just built weapons, they had built an entirely different kind of warfare. While other species focused on bigger ships and more powerful energy cannons, humans had approached the problem from a completely different angle. We studied every war in human history, Commander Yoon explained, as they returned to the central chamber. From ancient battles to world wars to small conflicts that most people have forgotten, we learned that technology alone does not win wars. You need strategy, surprise, and the will to do whatever is necessary to protect your people. Lee nodded. He had been part of the project since its beginning, but seeing everything together like this reminded him of what they were really preparing for. This was not just about building weapons. This was about survival. Above ground, the world continued its peaceful existence. People went to work, children attended school, families had dinner together. They knew that something was happening. News of the colony attack had spread quickly, but most did not understand the true significance of what was coming. In military facilities around the world, Earth's space fleet was being prepared for war. The ships themselves looked simple compared to the magnificent vessels that other species built. Human ships were blocky, utilitarian, painted in dull colors that would not stand out against the black of space. But like everything else humanity had built, appearances were deceiving. The hulls were made from materials that could absorb energy weapons and repair themselves. The engines could push the ships to speeds that would surprise anyone who judged them by their looks. And hidden within their simple exteriors were weapons, systems that no alien had ever imagined. Admiral Park Seo-jin stood on the bridge of the flagship Retribution, watching as the fleet assembled in Earth's orbit. 50 ships, each one carrying enough firepower to level a moon. It was not the largest fleet in the galaxy. The Vakari Empire alone had over 1,000 ships. But Park was not concerned with numbers. Status report, she commanded. All ships. Report ready, replied her aide, Commander Han Bo-ram. Weapons systems are armed, crews are at battle stations, and all quantum communication links are active. Park looked out at the stars, thinking about her daughter and grandchildren somewhere out there in Vakari slave camps. She had spent her entire career preparing for war while hoping it would never come. Now that it was here, she felt a strange sense of calm. Signal the fleet, she ordered. We depart in 6 hours. But before the fleet could leave, there was one more piece of the puzzle to put in place. On the far side of the moon, in a facility even more secret than the weapons research stations, a different kind of preparation was taking place. Dr. Choi Yoon-bi, the ambassador's younger sister and Earth's leading expert in alien psychology, stood before a wall of screens showing information about every species in the Galactic Council. For 20 years, she had studied alien cultures, learning how they thought, what they feared, and how they could be influenced. The Vakari Empire is built on a foundation of perceived strength, she explained to her team of psychological warfare specialists. Their entire society is based on the idea that they are superior to other species. If we can shatter that perception, their empire will collapse from within. On the screens, images of Vakari culture flashed by, their art, their entertainment, their religious beliefs, their deepest fears. Every piece of information had been carefully collected and analyzed. "What is their greatest weakness?" asked one of her assistants. "Pride," Yunbi replied immediately. "They cannot accept the possibility that another species might be superior to them. When they discover that humans are not the weak farmers they believed us to be, it will destroy their entire worldview." She pointed to a screen showing recordings of Vakari military history. "Look at how they fight. They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation. Their tactics have not changed in 1,000 years because they have never faced an enemy that could surprise them. But surprises are humanity's specialty." The team worked through the night, preparing psychological warfare programs that would be broadcast across the galaxy. The goal was not just to defeat the Vakari military, but to... The Proxima system had been chosen carefully. It was a minor Vakari outpost, far from their main fleet bases but close enough to their trade routes that news would spread quickly. Most importantly, it was where General Thekmar had taken his fleet after the successful raid on the human colony. Commander Yoon Jae-sung sat in the sensor station of the Retribution, watching the displays that showed 15 Vakari warships arranged in a defensive formation around the system's main planet. They were confident, relaxed, celebrating their easy victory over the humans. "They have not even raised their shields," he reported to Admiral Park So-jin. "Their weapon systems are powered down to minimum levels. They think they are completely safe." Park studied the tactical display, noting the positions of each enemy ship. The Vakari had arranged themselves in a standard defensive pattern that would work well against conventional attacks. Unfortunately for them, humans did not fight conventional wars. "Signal the fleet," she commanded. "Begin Phase 1. Across the human formation, 50 ships suddenly changed course. To any observer, it would look like a panicked retreat. The small human vessels turning away from the superior Vakari force and fleeing in apparent terror. On the bridge of the Vakari flagship, General Thekmar watched the approaching human ships with amusement. "Look at them run," he said to his officers. "Just like their colonists. No courage, no fighting spirit." "Should we pursue them, General?" asked his tactical officer. "Of course," Thekmar replied. "We cannot let them escape to tell tales of Vakari mercy. Destroy them all, but make sure to record it. The galaxy should see what happens to species that dare to challenge us." The Vakari fleet broke formation, their ships accelerating in pursuit of the fleeing humans. It was exactly what Admiral Park had expected them to do. The Vakari always fought the same way. Charge forward with overwhelming force, crush the enemy quickly, and move on to the next target. "Distance to optimal firing range?" Park asked. 30 seconds, Commander Yoon replied. "All weapon systems are ready. The enemy has still not raised their shields." Park watched the countdown on her display. The Vakari ships were spreading out as they chased the humans, each captain eager to claim the glory of destroying an enemy vessel. They had no idea they were flying into the most carefully planned trap in military history. 10 seconds, Yoon announced. "All ships," Park spoke into her communication system. "Execute Ragnarok Protocol. Show them what humans can do." The transformation was instant and terrifying. The fleeing human ships suddenly stopped their retreat and spun around to face their pursuers. Weapons ports that had been hidden beneath false hull plating snapped open. Shields that had been designed to look primitive blazed to life with energy levels that made Vakari sensors scream warnings. General Thekmar had exactly 3 seconds to realize that something was very wrong before the first quantum tunneling warheads reached his fleet. The warheads passed through the Vakari shields as if they did not exist. They phased through the thick armor plating that had protected Vakari ships for 1,000 years. They materialized inside the enemy vessels and exploded with the force of miniature suns. 4 Vakari ships simply vanished, turned to expanding clouds of superheated gas in the first seconds of the battle. The remaining ships tried desperately to raise their shields and power their weapons, But it was already too late. Commander Han Boram, aboard the destroyer Vengeance, released her hunter-killer drones with a simple command. Hunt! The drones poured out of their launch tubes like a black tide, each one no larger than a human fist but containing intelligence that surpassed most biological minds. They moved through space in swarms, flowing around enemy fire, adapting to every defensive measure the Vakari attempted. On the Vakari flagship, alarms were screaming as the crew tried to understand what was happening to them. Their shields were useless against the human warheads. Their point defense systems could not target the tiny drones that swarmed around their ships like angry insects, and their long-range sensors were showing energy readings that should have been impossible. What are those things? General Tekmar shouted as he watched thousands of small objects swarming toward his ship. Unknown, sir, his tactical officer replied, fear making his voice shake. Our computers cannot identify them. They are too small for our weapons to target effectively. The first drones reached the flagship and immediately began their work. They cut through the hull armor with focused energy beams, creating small holes that seemed insignificant. But as they entered the ship, they began to reproduce, using the Vakari's own materials to create more drones. Within minutes, the flagship's corridors were filled with thousands of the small machines. They moved with perfect coordination, cutting power lines, destroying control systems, and systematically dismantling everything that kept the ship operational. General Tekmar watched in horror as his bridge displays went dark one by one. Emergency lighting flickered on, then died as the drones found and destroyed the backup power systems. The artificial gravity failed, leaving the crew floating helplessly in the dark. Evacuate the ship, he ordered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was hopeless. The drones had already cut through the escape pod bays. They were trapped. Across the battlefield, the same scene was playing out on every Vakari vessel. The proud warships that had terrorized dozens of worlds were being torn apart from the inside by machines smaller than a human hand. Their crews, trained to fight other ships in honorable combat, had no idea how to defend against an enemy that was already inside their vessels. But Admiral Park was not finished with her demonstration. From her flagship, she activated the gravity well manipulator that Dr. Lee Min-seok had designed. The massive weapon reached across space itself, targeting the largest surviving Vakari ship. Gravity well activation in 3, 2, 1, Commander Yoon announced. Space around the targeted ship began to twist and fold. The Vakari vessel, which had been built to withstand the force of exploding stars, found itself caught in a gravitational field that pulled it in 12 different directions at once. Metal screamed as the ship was stretched and compressed simultaneously. The vessel lasted exactly 4 seconds before it collapsed into a point of infinite density, creating a miniature black hole that immediately evaporated in a flash of radiation. Where a kilometer-long warship had existed moments before, there was now nothing but empty space. "My God," whispered one of the human bridge officers. "We actually did it." Admiral Park felt no satisfaction as she watched the destruction of the Vakari fleet. This was not about revenge, it was about sending a message. The galaxy needed to understand that humanity was not weak, and sometimes lessons could only be taught through overwhelming demonstration of force. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, 15 Vakari warships had been reduced to scattered debris and expanding gas clouds. Not a single human vessel had taken any damage, but the real psychological warfare was just beginning. Dr. Choi Yunbi's programs activated across the galactic communication network, broadcasting the battle footage to every world in known space. The images were carefully edited to show the complete helplessness of the Vakari forces against human technology. The broadcasts were accompanied by recordings from Earth's historical archives, footage of human wars, images of destroyed cities, recordings of military leaders discussing tactics that made alien viewers physically ill. The message was simple. Humanity had been hiding its true nature for 30 years, but now the mask was off. On the Vakari homeworld, Emperor Vraktar watched the footage of his fleet's destruction with growing horror. These were not the weak farmers that his intelligence reports had described. These were predators who had been pretending to be prey. How is this possible, he demanded of his military advisors. Our ships are the most advanced in the galaxy. Our weapons are proven in 100 wars. How did humans destroy an entire fleet without losing a single vessel? None of his advisors had an answer. The human technology was unlike anything they had seen before. The warheads that passed through shields, the swarms of intelligent machines, the weapon that could create black holes, it was all beyond their understanding. Perhaps, suggested one of his generals carefully, we should consider negotiating with the humans. If their military capabilities are this advanced, perhaps we underestimated their diplomatic value as well. Emperor Vraktar struck the general, with one of his massive claws sending him sprawling across the floor. The Vakari Empire does not negotiate with inferior species, he roared. We have conquered 17 worlds. We will not be intimidated by farmers who learned a few new tricks. But even as he spoke, reports were coming in from across the empire. The broadcasts of human military might were causing panic on Vakari worlds. Species that had been conquered by the empire were beginning to whisper about rebellion. Trade partners were canceling contracts. The carefully constructed image of Vakari invincibility was crumbling. On other worlds throughout the galaxy, the reaction was even more dramatic. The Zephyrian Trade Federation, which had dismissed humanity as economically irrelevant, called an emergency session to discuss opening diplomatic relations with Earth. The Crystalline Collective, which had refused to share technology with Primity. The human fleet materialized in the Kepler system like ghosts emerging from a nightmare. 50 ships appeared simultaneously at different points around the colony world, their stealth systems so advanced that the Vakari sensors did not detect them until they were already in attack position. Admiral Park So-jin studied the tactical display showing the enemy forces around the planet, where her daughter and 50,000 other humans were being held as slaves. The Vakari had reinforced the system after losing General Tekmar's fleet, bringing in 200 ships to defend their new mining operation. They learned something from Proxima, Commander Yoon observed. Look at their formation. Spread out, shields raised, multiple defensive layers. They are taking us seriously now. Park nodded. The Vakari were no longer treating humans as helpless farmers. That was good. It meant they understood the threat, but it would not save them. Signal the fleet, she commanded. Begin operation. Shepard, show them what happens when you steal our children. The human ships did not attack in formation. Instead, they scattered across the system like seeds on the wind, each vessel following its own carefully planned route. To the Vakari defenders, it looked like the humans were making random, uncoordinated movements. They could not have been more wrong. Captain Kim Dae-ho commanded the destroyer Righteous Fury, named after the emotion that had driven humanity to this point. His ship appeared behind a small moon, invisible to Vakari sensors, and began launching hunter-killer drones toward the enemy fleet. The drones moved through space in carefully coordinated patterns, staying hidden in the shadows of asteroids and debris. They were programmed with one simple mission: find the Vakari command ships and destroy their ability to coordinate the defense. Meanwhile, Commander Hanbo Ram was approaching the planet itself in the stealth ship Silent Death. Her mission was different but equally important: locate and extract the human prisoners before the shooting started in earnest. On the planet's surface, the human colonists were being forced to work in deep mining tunnels, extracting rare minerals for the Vakari Empire. They had been working 16-hour shifts for weeks, sustained only by the hope that Earth might somehow come to rescue them. Park So-jin, the captured colonist and mother of Admiral Park, stood in the main mining shaft, directing other prisoners. Despite the terrible conditions, she had become a natural leader among the captives, organizing work schedules and keeping morale from collapsing entirely. Movement in the sky, whispered another prisoner, pointing upward through the shaft opening. Something is happening up there. Park squinted at the distant points of light that she knew were Vakari ships. For a moment she thought she saw new stars appearing and disappearing, but that was impossible. Then the lights began moving in patterns that made no sense for a routine patrol. On the surface, the Vakari guards were receiving increasingly frantic communications from their fleet commanders. Something was attacking their ships, but the enemy was invisible. Vessels were simply vanishing from sensors, their final transmissions cut off in mid-sentence. "All prisoners back to the tunnels," shouted the Vakari overseer, his voice carrying the panic that was spreading through their ranks. Emergency lockdown procedures. But even as the guards herded the humans underground, Commander Han's infiltration team was already moving. They had landed on the planet's night side and were approaching the mining complex using equipment that made them effectively invisible to Vakari sensors. The rescue mission that followed would become legendary in human military history. Han's team moved through the mining complex like shadows, systematically neutralizing guards without raising any alarms. They used weapons that made no sound and left no trace, dropping Vakari soldiers unconscious without them ever knowing they had been attacked. In space above the planet, the main battle was beginning in earnest. The Vakari fleet commanders had realized they were under attack, but they could not locate their enemies. Human ships appeared just long enough to launch their weapons, then vanished back into the darkness between worlds. The quantum tunneling warheads struck without warning, phasing through Vakari shields and armor to explode deep inside enemy vessels. The hunter-killer drones swarmed over the defending ships like mechanical plague, reproducing themselves using enemy materials until entire vessels were consumed from within. Admiral Park watched from her command ship as the enemy fleet began to collapse. The Vakari had brought 200 ships to defend the system, but they were fighting an enemy they could not see using tactics they did not understand. "Gravity well manipulator is ready," reported Commander Yoon. "Target the enemy flagship." Park studied the display showing the massive Vakari command vessel. It was 3 times larger than any human ship, bristling with weapons that could level cities. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a formidable opponent. "Fire," she commanded. Space twisted around the enemy flagship as gravitational forces beyond imagination took hold of it. The massive vessel, built to withstand the explosions of dying stars, was pulled in directions that physics said were impossible. Metal screamed across the vacuum as the ship was compressed and stretched simultaneously. The flagship lasted longer than the vessel at Proxima, almost 8 seconds, before it collapsed into a brief singularity that flashed once and disappeared, taking 3,000 Vakari crew members into whatever lay beyond the event horizon. On the planet below, the human prisoners felt the ground shake as debris from the destroyed ships began falling from orbit. But by then, Commander Han's rescue teams were already evacuating them through tunnels that led to hidden landing sites. "Move quickly, but stay quiet," Han whispered to the first group of rescued colonists. "Our ships are waiting, but we need to get everyone out before the Vakari realize what is happening." The evacuation proceeded with military precision. Small groups of prisoners were guided through maintenance tunnels and service passages, avoiding the main areas where confused Vakari guards were trying to understand why their orbital defenses were failing. Park So-jin found herself in the 3rd evacuation group, following a young human soldier through passages she had never seen during her weeks of captivity. The soldier moved with the fluid grace of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of mission. "How many of you are there?" she whispered. "Enough," the soldier replied simply. "Your daughter sends her regards, by the way. She is commanding the fleet that is currently destroying every Vakari ship in this system." Park felt tears of pride and relief streaming down her face. Her daughter had become Admiral Park, and she was coming to bring them home. Above them, the space battle was reaching its conclusion. Of the 200 Vakari ships that had defended the system, fewer than 30 remained operational. The survivors were trying desperately to retreat, but human ships pursued them with relentless efficiency. Captain Kim Dae-ho watched as the last enemy vessels jumped to hyperspace, carrying news of their defeat to other Vakari worlds. That was intentional. Admiral Park wanted the galaxy to know exactly what happened to anyone who threatened human civilians. "All prisoners evacuated successfully," reported Commander Han. 50,347 people recovered. No casualties among our people. Admiral Park felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The primary mission was complete. Their people were safe. But the war was far from over. "Signal Earth Command," she ordered. "Kepler system is secure. Beginning. Systematic elimination of Vakari military assets." What followed was a campaign unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The human fleet did not attack randomly or seek glorious battles. Instead, they methodically destroyed every Vakari military installation, supply depot, and strategic resource they could find. They struck like ghosts in the night, appearing without warning, destroying their targets with overwhelming force, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Vakari commanders found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to engage in conventional warfare. On the industrial world of Vakholm, the primary shipyard of the Vakari Empire received an unexpected visitor. Commander Yoon's ship, Shadow of the Immersiu, Earth appeared in orbit long enough to launch a single quantum warhead at the facility. The warhead phased through the orbital defense platforms as if they were not there, materialized inside the main construction bay, and detonated with the force of a small star. The shipyard that had built vessels for 1,000 years was reduced to expanding gas in less than 3 seconds. Similar strikes hit Vakari bases across a dozen star systems. Fuel depots, weapon factories, communication centers, training facilities. All were systematically eliminated by an enemy that struck without warning and left no survivors to explain what had happened. The psychological effect was exactly what Dr. Choi Yunbi had planned. Across the Vakari Empire, military commanders began sleeping in different locations every night, afraid that human ships might appear at any moment. Crews abandoned remote outposts, rather than risk being alone when the humans came for them. The dumb broadcasts of human military might continue to spread across the galaxy, showing the complete helplessness of Vakari forces against Earth's technology. The images were accompanied by historical footage from human wars, carefully selected to showcase humanity's capacity for total warfare. One broadcast that became particularly famous. Emperor Vraktar stood alone on the observation deck of his palace, looking up at the stars that had once represented his vast empire. In the past month, half of those stars had gone dark, as human forces systematically dismantled everything the HFY Vakari had built over thousands of years. His empire was dying, and he knew it. Reports arrived daily of worlds surrendering to human forces, of military bases being destroyed, of trade routes being cut. The proud civilization that had once ruled 17 star systems was being reduced to a single world, his homeworld. Emperor. His aide approached carefully. The young Vakari looked exhausted and frightened. Most of the palace staff had fled in recent days, abandoning their posts to seek safety in the countryside. The humans have arrived. Vraktar closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come, but he had hoped for more time. More time to find a weapon that could hurt them. More time to rally his scattered forces. More time to find some way to salvage his empire. How many ships? He asked. 1, my lord. Vraktar opened his eyes and stared at his aide. 1 ship, are you certain? Yes, Emperor. A single human vessel has entered our system. It is broadcasting a message on all frequencies. The Emperor felt something cold settle in his stomach. 1 ship? After destroying hundreds of Vakari vessels and conquering dozens of worlds, the humans had sent a single ship to his homeworld. The message was unmistakable. They were so confident of their superiority that they did not need a fleet to defeat him. Show me, he commanded. They walked to the palace's main communication center, where the surviving staff were huddled around. Displays showing the approaching human ship. It looked unremarkable compared to the magnificent vessels the Vakari preferred. Blocky, utilitarian, painted in dull colors that would not stand out against space. But Vraktar had learned not to judge human vessels by their appearance. That innocent-looking ship probably carried enough firepower to reduce his entire world to rubble. Play the message, he ordered. The main display activated, showing the face of a human female in military uniform. She looked tired, but determined, her eyes holding the same cold fury that had driven humanity's campaign of destruction across his empire. I am Admiral Park Sojin of the Earth Defense Fleet, she said, her voice calm and steady. I am speaking directly to Emperor Vraktar of the Vakari Empire. You have 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally and prepare for immediate transfer to human custody. Your countdown begins now. The message ended, leaving the communication center in absolute silence. 30 seconds. Not 30 minutes or 30 hours. 30 seconds to surrender an empire that had existed for millennia. My lord? The aide whispered. What are your orders? Vraktar looked around the communication center at the faces of his remaining staff. These were people who had served him faithfully for years, believing in the strength and glory of the Vakari Empire. Now they looked at him with fear and desperation, hoping he could somehow save them from the humans. But he knew there was no salvation. The humans had demonstrated their power across a dozen star systems, destroying everything in their path with casual efficiency. They had turned his mighty empire into scattered refugees and burning debris. Open a communication channel, he said finally. I will speak to this Admiral Park. The display flickered to life, showing the interior of the human ship. Admiral Park sat in what appeared to be a simple command chair, surrounded by displays and crew members who looked remarkably ordinary for people who had just conquered an empire. Emperor Vraktar, she said, her voice showing no emotion. Have you decided to surrender? What are your terms? Vraktar asked, hating the defeat he could hear in his own voice. Unconditional surrender, Park replied. Your military forces will be disbanded, your government will be dissolved, your people will be placed under human oversight until we determine they are no longer a threat to peaceful species. The Emperor felt rage building in his chest. You cannot simply destroy a civilization that has existed for thousands of years. Watch me, Park said simply. You had 30 seconds. You now have 15. On the display behind Admiral Park, Vraktar could see technical readouts that made his blood freeze. The human ship was charging some kind of weapon, and the energy readings were beyond anything his scientists had ever imagined possible. Wait, he said desperately. What about my people? What about the civilians on this world? Your people will be treated according to the same mercy you showed human colonists. Park replied. Those who committed no crimes against humanity will be allowed to rebuild their lives under our protection. Those who participated in slavery and conquest will face justice. And me? You ordered the attack on our colony. You authorized the enslavement of 50,000 humans. You will face trial for war crimes. Vraktar looked around the communication center one more time. He could try to fight, could order his remaining forces to make a last stand, but it would be suicide. And it would accomplish nothing except the deaths of innocent civilians. He began, then stopped. The words were harder to say than he had expected. I surrender. The Vakari Empire surrenders unconditionally to humanity. Admiral, Park nodded once. Wise decision. Prepare for boarding. Any resistance will be met with immediate and total destruction. The communication ended, leaving Vraktar alone with his thoughts. In the space of 6 weeks, humanity had gone from galactic joke to the most feared military force in known space. They had not just defeated his empire, they had erased it from existence. As human shuttles descended from orbit to take him into custody, Vraktar wondered how his intelligence services had gotten things so wrong. How had they mistaken humanity's peaceful nature for weakness? How had they failed to detect the advanced technology that had made this conquest possible? The answer, he realized, was that humans had never been weak. They had simply chosen to be peaceful. And when that peace was threatened, they had revealed what they were truly capable of. Meanwhile, in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, representatives from dozens of species sat in absolute silence as Ambassador Choi Yunbi delivered her final report on the war. The Vakari Empire has surrendered unconditionally, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. Emperor Vraktar is in human custody and will face trial for war crimes. The enslaved colonists have been returned to their families. The threat to peaceful species has been eliminated. The silence stretched on for long minutes. These were the same beings who had mocked humanity just weeks earlier, who had dismissed Earth as irrelevant, who had laughed when Choi Yunbi demanded justice for the colony attack. Now they sat in stunned terror, realizing that the species they had underestimated possessed military capabilities beyond their nightmares. The humans had not just won a war. They had rewritten the balance of power in the galaxy. Council leader Vextar finally found his voice. Ambassador Choi, he said carefully, the Council wishes to express its admiration for humanity's decisive response to the crisis. Perhaps we should discuss Earth's status within our organization. Choi Yunbi looked around the chamber at faces that no longer showed contempt or amusement. Instead, she saw fear, respect, and desperate hope that humanity would not turn its attention to other species that had dismissed them. The status we want is simple, she replied. We want to be treated as equals. We want our voices heard when decisions are made. We want respect for our sovereignty and protection for our people. Of course, Vextar said quickly. Full membership in the Council with all voting rights and privileges. Special recognition of Earth's unique capabilities. Around the chamber, other representatives nodded eagerly. Species that had refused to trade with humanity were now offering exclusive partnerships. Governments that had dismissed Earth's diplomatic efforts were requesting immediate alliance negotiations. But Choi Yunbi was thinking about something else. She was thinking about a conversation she had had with Admiral Park before the final battle, when they discussed what would happen after the war ended. Humanity does not seek to rule the galaxy, she had said then. We never wanted war in the first place. We want to go back to being farmers and merchants and explorers, but we want to do it without being seen as weak. The war had accomplished that goal. Humanity would never again be dismissed as harmless or irrelevant. The galaxy had learned that Earth's peaceful nature was a choice, not a weakness, and that choice could be changed if circumstances required it. On Earth, celebrations were taking place in every city as news of the victory spread. The rescued colonists had returned home as heroes, bringing with them stories of their rescue by human forces that had appeared like guardian angels in their darkest hour. But in the secret facilities where Project Ragnarok had been born, Dr. Lee Min-suk was already thinking about the future. The war had revealed some of humanity's capabilities, but not all of them. There were weapons and technologies that had never been used, secrets that remained hidden even from most of Earth's government. What? Now? Asked Commander Yoon Jae-sung as they walked through the underground complex that had made humanity's victory possible. Now we prepare for peace, Lee replied. But we stay ready for war. The galaxy has learned to respect us, but respect born from fear can be fragile. We must make sure no one ever again makes the mistake of thinking